Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast.
Thanks for having me.
What does it take to tear down a system you spent your whole life inside, just to rebuild it from the ground up?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It really is. Today, we're exploring a pretty remarkable life and, honestly, a completely transformative era. We're drawing on a really detailed obituary and a stack of accompanying historical notes for this.
Yeah, the material here is just fascinating.
Right. So the focus of our conversation today comes directly from a piece titled朱镕基, the plain-speaking architect of China's market reforms, dies at 97.
A truly monumental figure.
Absolutely. We're going to spend some time exploring the life, the record, and the entirely unique temperament of the man who was affectionately known as Boss Zhu.
Boss Zhu, yeah.
Because, this was a leader who treated the massive, incredibly complex task of governing not as this rigid exercise in ideology or doctrine, but as a deeply practical engineering problem.
Which is so rare.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, to truly understand his approach to governing, we really have to look closely at his foundational decades.
Right, where it all started.
Exactly. We're talking about a mind that was shaped by the strict discipline of engineering, sure, but profoundly influenced by experiencing the absolute worst flaws of a planned economic system from the very bottom.
A ground floor.
Yeah. So he was born in 1928 in the southern province of Hunan. He was orphaned at a young age, actually, and raised by uncles.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it was a tough start. But he eventually graduates with a degree in electrical engineering from the highly prestigious Tsinghua University in Beijing.
Which lands him a job at the State Planning Commission.
Precisely.
And for you listening, if you aren't steeped in economic history, that might sound like just another dry, bureaucratic office.
It sounds like a lot of paperwork.
Right. But in a stripped command economy, the State Planning Commission is the absolute brain of the country.
It's everything.
It's the nerve center where every single production quota, every allocation of steel, every price tag for, like, a loaf of bread, and every major economic decision for a vast nation is supposedly mapped out in advance.
It's wild to even conceptualize.
It really is. It's essentially attempting to run a country-sized game of SimCity, but without any natural price signals from a free market to guide you.
Yeah, and for him, it was the ultimate vantage point to see how the machine was designed to work in theory.
In theory, right.
But his ascent within that machine would stall almost as soon as it began.
Wait, really? Why?
Well, starting in the late 1950s, his career essentially vanished. For roughly 2 decades, he was forced to just languish in relative obscurity.
2 decades?
Yeah, completely far away from the halls of power. And crucially, this period included 5 grueling years of doing manual farm work.
Man, it's like a master mechanic being forced to drive a broken car for 20 years. By the time he finally gets under the hood, he knows exactly what's wrong with the engine, and he just wants to get to work fixing it.
That's a great way to put it, because what's fascinating here is how those wilderness years function as an economics education you simply cannot get from reading academic theory.
Because you're living it.
Exactly. When you spend 5 years doing physical farm work, you aren't looking at abstract production quotas on a chalkboard in Beijing. You're watching firsthand what a top-down planned economy actually does to ordinary people on the ground.
You see the realities.
You see the massive inefficiencies. You see crops rotting because transportation wasn't allocated properly, or factories halting because parts didn't arrive on schedule.
Right, the friction of the whole system.
Yeah, you experience the human toll of ideological economics. And yet, when he finally emerged from those 2 decades in the wilderness, he returned to government service without any visible bitterness.
That is genuinely surprising.
It is. He actively managed to eschew revenge or ideological warfare in favor of just extreme pragmatism.
And then that extreme pragmatism is what fueled his rise when his career finally resumed, right?
Oh, absolutely. By the late 1980s, he becomes the mayor of Shanghai.
Okay. And he won widespread plaudits for his immense drive to modernize what was then described as a magnificent ruin.
A magnificent ruin, wow.
Yeah, it was a city starved of investment for 3 decades. He opened up the marshy farmland across the river, laying the groundwork for that massive towered skyline that the whole world recognizes today.
The one you see in all the photos.
Exactly. His success there gets him summoned to Beijing, and he eventually becomes prime minister in 1998.
But let's pause here, because I have to ask a structural question about how he operated.
Sure.
Large, collective bureaucratic systems generally reward blending in. They reward people who don't rock the boat. Yet Zhu was famously blunt,
Very blunt.
He actively sought to weed out incompetence. How does someone with that kind of abrasive, plain-speaking temperament survive, let alone rise to the very top of a system like that?
It really comes down to a complete mastery of the details.
Okay, what do you mean? Well, in a collective leadership system, power is shared among senior colleagues, and major decisions are heavily argued out in endless meetings. Zhu didn't wield authority simply because he possessed a fancy title.
Right. The title isn't enough.
No, he wielded it because he was relentlessly, overwhelmingly prepared.
He did his homework?
He did everyone's homework. He read complex balance sheets the way other officials might scan a morning newspaper. He possessed this intense intellectual curiosity.
I can imagine that made him pretty intimidating.
Oh, terrifying. During inspection tours, if a local official was briefing him, they were terrified. He wouldn't just nod along to a slide presentation.
He'd dig in.
He would ask incredibly detailed, granular questions, and he actually listened to the math and the answers. If the numbers didn't add up, he would dismantle their presentation right on the spot.
Wow. So his sheer competence made him virtually untouchable in those rooms.
Exactly.
Which brings us to arguably the most famous thing he ever said. Shortly after taking office as prime minister, he declared publicly that he had ordered 100 coffins.
Yes. The coffins line.
99 for corrupt officials and 1 for himself. It's an incredibly theatrical anchor quote, but it feels like there is a deeper economic philosophy behind it, beyond just a standard moral crusade against bad behavior.
You're spot on. The underlying philosophy is strictly mechanical.
Mechanical.
Yeah. For Zhu, graft wasn't just a moral failing or a bad headline. He viewed corruption as a literal mathematical tax on economic growth.
Oh, I see.
Think about it from an engineering perspective. If every farmer, every factory owner, and every foreign investor has to grease a palm or pay an unofficial bribe just to get a basic permit approved.
Or to move goods across a provincial line.
Right, that is a debilitating levy on productivity. It is intense friction in the machine. Corruption was sand in the gears of the economy he was trying to fix, and he was determined to clean it out simply to maximize the system's efficiency.
And he needed the machine running at maximum efficiency immediately, right? Because his main task in Beijing was to reinvigorate pro-market reforms that had completely faltered. He inherited an economy facing a massive destabilizing crisis. It was running hot, but in the absolute worst way. We are talking about annual inflation peaking at over 24%.
Which is staggering.
For you listening and managing your own budget, imagine what 24% inflation means. Savers are watching the value of their bank deposits essentially melt away.
It's disappearing.
The purchasing power of ordinary families is evaporating month by month.
And to compound the crisis, the state's own finances were in a parlous condition.
How bad was it?
Bad. The central government was collecting so little revenue, it could barely fund its own basic operations.
Jeez. So what does he do?
Zhu implements a massive austerity program. He moves aggressively to rein in prices, and this is where his technical skill set really shines.
Because he couldn't just order it to stop.
Right, he didn't just order prices to stop rising by decree. He pulled the heavy levers of macroeconomics.
Like what?
He tightened credit. He forced the state banks to stop lending easy money to speculative vanity real estate projects pushed by local officials. He restricted the overall money supply.
Which, that must have made him wildly unpopular with local bureaucrats who relied on that endless stream of easy credit to fund their pet projects.
Oh, it absolutely did. They were furious. But the mechanics worked.
The numbers don't lie.
Exactly. He successfully cooled the economy, brought inflation down rapidly, and did it without triggering the hard landing.
The severe recession.
Right. The recession that most international economists at the time feared was just inevitable. It was a masterclass in macroeconomic stabilization.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because stabilizing the inflation was only the emergency triage.
Yeah, just putting out the fire.
Exactly. To actually rebuild the foundation of the country, he executes the 1994 tax sharing reform. And, on paper, tax reform sounds deeply unglamorous.
It really does.
It sounds like a bunch of accountants shuffling papers in a back room. But I want us to dive into the plumbing of this because it is arguably his most consequential act.
It absolutely is. So let's look at how the plumbing actually functioned before 1994.
Okay, lay it out for us.
The fiscal relationship between the central government in Beijing and the various local provinces was entirely ad hoc. It was essentially a negotiated contract system.
Negotiated how?
Well, a province would agree to hand over a fixed lump sum to the center, and they got to keep whatever else they collected above that target.
Oh, I see the problem there.
Right. So as the economy began to grow in the early 90s, the provinces were getting immensely wealthy, keeping the lion's share of the new revenue.
While the center is just stuck with the flat fee.
Yes. The center was literally starving for funds.
It sounds like a franchise model where the local stores are keeping all the profits and the corporate headquarters is going bankrupt trying to keep the lights on.
That is a perfect analogy. The central government was practically passing a hat around to the provinces.
Begging for cash.
Exactly. And Zhu recognized that you cannot run a massive modernizing nation that way. So he completely overhauls it.
Yeah.
He shifts the country from that ad hoc negotiation to a standardized, rule-based tax-sharing system. He designates certain high-growth taxes, most importantly the value-added tax,
The VAT.
right, as shared revenues, but with the central government taking the clear majority, roughly 75%.
That's a huge shift. But how do you enforce that if the local guys are used to keeping the money?
That was the genius part. He didn't rely on the local governments. He created a whole new network of national tax bureaus, completely independent from local provincial bosses, to collect the central government share directly.
Wow, so he bypassed them entirely?
Yep, it was a massive centralization of fiscal power. It filled the government's coffers virtually overnight, and that 1994 reform remains the structural backbone of Chinese public finance to this very day.
Incredible. So, having stabilized the currency and filled the national coffers, Zhu finally had the fiscal breathing room to look at the biggest, most structural rot in the entire economy.
The tough stuff.
The state-owned enterprises, the SOEs. This was the system universally known as the Iron Rice Bowl.
Yeah, and this raises an important question about how societies manage industrial transitions, because the Iron Rice Bowl was unlike anything we see in Western economies.
Right, it's hard to even compare.
These were massive state-run factories that operated entirely outside the logic of a market economy. They didn't just provide a worker with a monthly paycheck.
They were everything.
They guaranteed lifelong employment. They provided the housing blocks for the workers. They ran the local schools for the workers' children. And they provided the medical clinics.
Entire communities and family lineages were built around these specific factories, generation after generation.
Exactly.
It's a cradle-to-grave welfare state, localized entirely within a single steel mill or textile plant.
And by the 1990s, the math simply didn't work anymore.
It couldn't.
These enterprises were notoriously inefficient, massively indebted, and producing goods that nobody actually wanted to buy. Instead of creating capital for the nation, they were consuming it at an alarming rate.
They were a financial black hole dragging the rest of the economy down.
Precisely.
But shutting them down isn't just a balance sheet decision. Imagine telling millions of people that the safety net their parents relied on, the very fabric of their community, is just gone overnight. How do you even begin to manage the human fallout of an undertaking that massive?
You manage it with extreme urgency and a brutal honesty that is exceedingly rare in public policy.
You didn't sugarcoat it?
Not at all. Zhu never pretended that dismantling the Iron Rice Bowl wouldn't be devastatingly painful. We are talking about restructuring hundreds of loss-making enterprises.
Millions of people.
Millions upon millions of workers lost jobs their families had held for a generation.
That's just a staggering human cost.
It is. And to prevent a complete social collapse, the pension systems and the unemployment safety nets needed to catch all these displaced workers had to be assembled essentially from scratch in an absolute hurry.
He famously told reporters upon taking office as prime minister that whatever lay ahead of him, whether it was a minefield or a bottomless abyss, he would press on without looking back.
And he said that specifically in the context of this state-owned enterprise reform.
Wow.
It requires immense respect for the sheer difficulty of the choice. This wasn't a simplistic story of winners and losers or a politician scoring points.
No, not at all.
It was a brutally hard trade-off, honestly made by a leader who looked at the ledger and realized he had no other mathematical choice if the country's broader economy was going to survive.
He just faced the math.
He accepted the political and social cost with his eyes wide open, speaking to the public like adults, acknowledging the immense hardship, but insisting it was the only structural path forward.
And once those incredibly painful domestic hurdles were cleared, he aggressively moved to slash red tape to lure foreign investors.
Opening the doors.
Right, but his final masterstroke was about looking outward. He wanted to lock in these market reforms so tightly that they could never be reversed by a future administration.
Yes.
And he decided the only way to do that was to spearhead the effort to join the World Trade Organization, the WTO, in 2001.
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Please do.
The 2001 WTO accession is the hinge event of the modern global economy. It did not happen easily or inevitably. Zhu drove the negotiations personally through years of grueling stop-start bargaining.
It's a lot of resistance, I'd imagine.
Oh, at times, he faced fierce objections from his own colleagues who argued he was giving away the store, conceding far too much access to Western markets and threatening domestic industries.
It's like Odysseus tying himself to the mast of the ship. He deliberately binds the country to the global economy so that no matter how alluring the siren song of the old command economy gets, they literally cannot turn the ship around.
That's exactly what he did.
He pushed it through, and the results were staggering. Joining the WTO completely rewired the global supply chain.
Unimaginable scale.
It gave domestic manufacturers unprecedented access to the richest consumer markets on Earth, while giving domestic consumers access to foreign goods and capital. The economic growth that followed was entirely without precedent in its scale and its speed.
Crucially, from his engineering perspective, it was about locking the architectural blueprints in place permanently.
Making it irreversible.
By joining the WTO, the country was legally binding itself to a massive set of external international rules. Tariffs had to come down, regulations had to become transparent, foreign companies had to be allowed to compete in certain sectors.
They couldn't just change their minds later.
Right. It meant that no domestic constituency, no matter how powerful they used to be under the old planned economy, could quietly ignore the market reforms and try to revert to the old ways.
They were locked in.
He anchored the new domestic system to an unmovable global framework.
Which is incredible foresight. And then he retired in 2003. But the engine he built and the mechanics he trained to run it kept the country moving long after he officially stepped away.
That is a vital, enduring part of his legacy.
The people he left behind.
Exactly. He eschewed pure ideology, but he was intensely passionate about competence. Throughout his tenure, he trained and promoted an entire cohort of economic and financial specialists.
The next generation of mechanics.
We're talking about central bankers, securities regulators, and finance officials who absorbed his rigorous, data-driven habits of mind.
They learned how to read the blueprints.
They occupied senior posts for years afterward, carrying his pragmatic, balance sheet reading approach into institutions he never personally ran. He built a system, but he also left behind the highly skilled operators needed to maintain it.
And his connection with the public remained incredibly unique, even in retirement.
It really did.
He largely withdrew from public view, avoiding the spotlight, but eventually volumes of his old speeches and press conferences were published, and they sold briskly.
Bestsellers, practically.
People were eagerly buying up massive books containing transcripts of old economic briefings. It clearly shows that readers evidently missed hearing an official talk like that, someone who was blunt, clear, and treated them with the respect of speaking plainly about hard realities.
It highlights why his passing is being framed by historians as the end of a specific era.
The end of an era, yeah.
He was nearly the last of what was called the third generation of leaders, individuals born in the 1920s and 30s, educated formally as engineers, who approached the massive task of governing as a problem of load-bearing walls, power grids, and fiscal architecture.
Not doctrine, but architecture.
That engineer's cast of mind was the true hallmark of his career. He belonged to a very particular moment in time when the biggest questions facing the nation were deeply technical ones, and a man who understood the mechanics of an economy and spoke his mind could rise to answer them.
So what does this all mean for you? It gives us a brilliant window into how the modern global economy was actually constructed. It wasn't built by invisible abstract forces. It was built by deeply pragmatic individuals making incredibly hard mechanical choices about how a society's plumbing should operate.
The hard choices no one else wanted to make.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, when a leader treats governing purely as an engineering problem, what happens to a society once the ultimate architectural foundation is finally built and the engineers retire? It's a fascinating question about the life cycles of economic eras.
A really profound thought to end on.
Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs, and don't forget to like, comment, and share.